What's up guys, it's River and today we're doing a quick dive into the Nikon D850. I would say this is probably my favorite studio and sports camera, so if you're thinking about picking one up or you're just curious what all the hype is about, we're going to look at 5 things that are interesting and maybe make this camera worth it, but you'll have to watch the video to find out. This is basically the Spark Notes or the people in a hurry version of my full review that you can find on the channel, so if you're short on time, we're going to do a quick dive to see if this camera is really worth it. And before we get into the video, I just quickly want to say to the people that have been leaving these really nice comments on these videos, thank you so much. They honestly make my day, especially this time of the year. I really appreciate it. And also, whatever products we talk about in this video, I'll make sure to leave a link in the description down below, so be sure to check that out. So the first thing we have to talk about is the sensor. If I talked about anything else first, it'd kind of be wasting your time. This camera has an absolutely phenomenal sensor. It's full frame. And it's 45 megapixels. It's usually hard to have a full frame sensor with such a high pixel count because you just got to squeeze all those pixels in there, and usually you end up with something closer to the 5D Mark IV, which is 30 megapixels, or sometimes even 24, which is the A7 III. But 45 megapixels in a full frame sensor is bonkers because not only do you get extended dynamic range because of the sensor size, there's just more room to capture light, but you also get way more resolution. You can really punch in, zoom in, and just like really manipulate your image. You have so much data to work with. There's literally nothing that you can't do with this camera. And something that I should mention, when it comes to shadows, there's so much detail there. Even when it looks like it's black and there's just no information there, you can usually pull it up and get usable information, especially if you're gonna print. Usually if shadows are dark and you try to print that area, it's gonna look bad in the photo. I honestly am super impressed with the sensor, and I feel like there's almost nothing that this camera cannot shoot. And number 2, we're gonna talk about the sensor again. Again, this camera really shines when it comes to the sensor. Because of the 45 megapixel sensor, there's really nothing that you can't do. 45 megapixels is a lot. And if you're new to cameras, let me put into perspective. Something like the A7 III, which is a $2,000 camera, has a 24 megapixel. $2,500 camera like the 5D Mark IV has a 30 megapixel camera. And generally, most cameras that you see on the market have somewhere between 24, 26, 30 is kind of interesting and high end. A7R2 is 35, 45 is bananas. I have a Helium 8K, which is a red camera. It's $80,000, and this camera still is only 35 megapixels. 45 is truly bonkers, and this gives you so much flexibility. If you want to do a wide shot, but you realize, I really like the look of that model, I wish I had that as a close-up, you can just punch right in, you won't lose too much detail, it's good enough for printing, and it honestly is like magic. One of the reasons I got into digital image making instead of film was that you had way less limitation, and this camera really holds true to that principle. And because of that higher resolution, you can really go in and fine-tune every last detail in your photos. If you want to make art, absolute perfection, like something that you want to see in museums or magazine covers, billboards, can really go in, touch in every little pore, touch up every little hair. It literally gives you the tools to do anything you want. One of my really good friends, Lane Dorsey, is I think my favorite photographer in North America. He's amazing. If you look at his work, you can really see that he's taken the time to really tweak every last detail, and his images are legitimately perfection. This is the camera that he uses and he swears by it. So we've talked enough about the sensor, let's talk about the body. It's very evident that when they designed this body, they had professionals in mind. Everything on this camera just flows. The way you hold down one button and turn another dial and takes you from one mode to another, can easily switch between focus modes. All the buttons are exactly laid out the way they should be. I don't want to get into too much detail. I really recommend checking out the full review, but the buttons are perfect. You have a scroll wheel, a thumb dial, everything you need. You have touch autofocus. Literally, I have no complaints about the body. Actually, you know what? I'm great at nitpicking. Here's something I can complain about. This camera doesn't come with a battery grip. While I think the battery that Nikon makes are more than good enough and they last quite a long time, the battery grip actually lets you shoot faster. And the battery grip, in my opinion, also lets you hold the camera better. You can hold it vertically, just gives you a better grip on it. But it bothers me that I have to spend an extra $500 to get more power out of my camera. I feel like they should have figured out a way to have that power in the camera without having to spend an extra $500. That would be like buying a really nice car and they're like, oh, but if you want it to go super fast, you got to spend another like bunch of money on this. That's annoying. because for $500 I could get a really nice lens. Now the next thing about this camera, and this might surprise a few of you, it's kind of dog shit when it comes to video, which is really surprising because it is an expensive camera. But if you're a photographer, this is a great camera, and I've used this on a few music videos as a B cam. But I noticed that there's really nothing that's special about the video. I can kind of take that video, put a bunch of like grain over it to kind of hide the fact that it's a DSLR, and just throw it in for a quick shot here and there. But if you want it to be a video first person with this camera, you are absolutely wasting your time. You should definitely get either a Sony like the a7 III or the 5D Mark IV, or pretty much anything else but this camera. The reason for that is until recently, when Nikon started putting out mirrorless cameras, they really did not think that much about video. Nikon has always kind of been a photo first company, even when Canon was dropping the 5D Mark II with HD and people were like, wow, it's a DSLR that does pretty decent video. Nikon's like, nah, we're gonna do photos. And they haven't really been thinking about video in any of their cameras until they're mirrorless. So the video being bad in this camera is just because Nikon did not care. And you'll probably see a music video B-roll playing over this part. The truth is, whatever you see is what you get. We did not touch up the footage, and there's really no way to touch up the footage. If you really push and pull these colors, it tends to fall apart pretty quickly. But if you did want to set up this camera for a corporate interview or just like a corporate video where you don't really need to have a fancy look, you'll be just fine. So if you're a wedding photographer that wants to dabble in just a little bit of video, you should be fine. Last but not least, the focusing system. I purposely saved the focusing system for the end because the focusing system in this camera is shockingly robust. But again, it makes sense. It is a studio camera. I was really impressed by how fast and snappy the autofocus was. I would literally just hit it, catch focus really quickly, and I never felt like I was waiting for the focus to catch up with me. I tend to shoot at very fast shutter speeds. Like, I mean, 1000/1. Like, I'm just running through that. I really don't like a lot of motion blur, and this camera definitely kept up with me. And I know it probably sounds like Nikon's paying me or something to say this, but I was really impressed by how fast and just like quick and reliable it was. Even something like the 5D Mark IV, it's pretty fast, but I do feel like, especially in live view, I'm like, I'm gonna need for it to catch focus and then I'm gonna shoot. But even in live view, this camera is just very sharp, very snappy. And if you're someone that likes touchscreen, this camera has really good touch autofocus, which was surprising. I wasn't expecting it to have really good touch autofocus, but it was really good. I tend to shoot a lot in live view. And just being able to look at my subject, click it, and it's in focus. It's fast, it was snappy. There's really nothing bad that I have to say about the autofocusing system. In my initial review, I actually said that this autofocusing system wasn't good in low light, and that was my fault. I've said this a few times now, I'm sorry. I guess I just didn't really understand how to properly tune my autofocus. The autofocusing system is fine in low light if you're in live view, but if you're looking through the eyepiece, it generally doesn't keep up. Also, for those of you who say, don't say eyepiece, OLPF, optical viewfinder, I just like saying eyepiece because it's easy for other people to understand. Optical viewfinder makes me sound like I think I'm the Queen of France or something. Optical viewfinder. So two things that I really liked about this camera were focus peaking and focus stacking. Focus peaking is when it puts a highlight around fine details in the object, so you know that even the fine details are in focus, especially when you're doing product photography where every little detail counts and the object is like this small. Yeah, product photography really be like that sometimes. However, focus peaking made it super easy to do that stuff, and believe it or not, focus peaking is something you don't often see in DSLRs. It was very, very nice to see that in this camera. And on top of that, it has focus stacking. Now, focus stacking is something specifically for product photography. It's usually when, don't think I have an example of this, but it's usually when you're focusing on something really small, but you want the entire thing in focus. And usually if you shoot small things, front part will be in focus, but the back will not. This camera has a feature where it makes the lens go through different focal lengths, takes a photo every time. You merge those photos in Photoshop, and as long as your camera did not move, voila, you combine those 8 and it looks like everything's in focus. And one thing that I quickly want to mention, when it comes to video, the focusing system is pretty meh. It's not abysmal like a Vin Diesel movie, but it's not amazing, kind of like a Keanu Reeves movie. I'm sorry, Keanu. I love you, you're my friend. Also, for the people that say I look like Keanu Reeves, you know what? He's amazing, he's a badass. Like, I can tease Keanu all I want because I'm a nobody, but he's a dedicated artist. That's a compliment, thank you. If you don't think I look like Keanu Reeves, yeah, me neither. And that wraps up our video on the Nikon D850, the things that you have to know about this camera. If you have any further questions about this camera, let me know in the comments down below. I love chatting it up with you guys, so do not hesitate to leave me a comment. I also will be putting a link for all the products that we talked about in the description down below, so be sure to check that out. Last but not least, make sure to leave me a like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me figure out what kind of content you guys like, what kind of stuff I should make going forward. That's pretty much it, guys. See you next time.